Good afternoon. These are truly unprecedented times. When we started our budget process in the fall of last year, there was optimism throughout our community and at City Hall. We have begun to see the progress under our Rochester 2034 plan take root, and we were eager to build upon it. However, after the last 2 months, our world has changed. Our city government is now at the forefront of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just yesterday, our community reached a new peak for the number of people hospitalized by this disease. We must remain vigilant and prepared to deal with this crisis and its impact in the months and years to come. And this budget reflects our new reality. As I said before, the COVID-19 is a public health crisis that has become a fiscal crisis for Rochester and cities across America. When we started our budget process, we had a projected $40.5 million budget gap. This gap in the last 8 weeks increased to $64.4 million as a result of this health crisis. The budget I am submitting closes this gap and protects police, fire, and other services like refuse collection and food distribution, which are essential to our community and the residents we serve. I'm glad to share that every single police officer and firefighter on the job today will keep serving our community next year. We heard loud and clear during our telephone town hall and on our online survey that this was our residents' top budget priority. My proposal also maintains refuge and recycling collection, including regular bulk refuse pickup, and preserves our ability to distribute food at our centers alongside our community partners, the Rochester City School District and FoodLink. Over 500,000 meals have been provided to school-aged children and their families since the beginning of this crisis, and I'm thankful to our DRIVES team for that. And my budget continues to fund the city's contribution to this effort in full, so we can continue to ensure that our families in need don't go hungry as our economy continues to be battered by the COVID-19. We also continue to protect and support our small businesses. To date, nearly 300 local employers have been allocated a total of nearly $600,000 from our emergency grant program. Thankful to City Council and the CARES Act from our federal government for doing that. We are doing all we can to be there for our families and businesses as our entire community comes together to protect our circle and our city. We are also continuing to make long overdue investments in our community. This fall, the international market at La Marqueta will open and become home to new small businesses looking to build wealth and create opportunity on North Clinton Avenue, keeping a promise made to our Latino community decades before. Our neighborhood police section office on East Main Street will begin construction, bringing our police back into our neighborhoods and creating new connections between our officers and the residents that they serve. We have moved into the new former chamber building on St. Paul Street, bringing the Department of Youth and Recreation Services staff together to serve our kids at this central location across from the bus terminal. Rock the Riverway will continue to transform our downtown and turn our city back toward the mighty Genesee through projects at Charles Carroll Plaza, the Rundell Library, the new Rock City Skate Park, and the Blue Cross Arena, and much, much more. While we are making these important and necessary investments in protecting essential services in this budget, I have to make this very clear. Our city's finances are being challenged like never before. We rely upon three major revenue sources to fund our government: property tax, sales tax, and state aid. Unfortunately, the latter two sources have been dramatically impacted by the COVID crisis. Sales tax revenue supporting this upcoming year's budget is expected to decline by 15%, or over $24 million compared to our current budget. And the state's financial plan suggests that our state AIM aid may be cut by $17.6 million, or 20% this fiscal year. The impact of these losses cannot be understated. We have already taken many steps to mitigate the impact of this crisis on our taxpayers by freezing our discretionary spending and non-essential hiring, as well as personnel changes I announced last week. These actions in and of itself have saved us over $16 million. But even with these steps, the revenue losses are expected to have a significant impact on our fund balance. I am grateful that our sound fiscal management, with the past support of City Council, has allowed us to have these reserves on hand to continue essential services. However, our fund balance alone is insufficient to overcome the financial challenges presented by this crisis. In addition, total spending in the budget actually decreases by 4.7%, or over $26 million, demonstrating our commitment to fiscal discipline and protecting our taxpayers. However, in order to make the long-term changes for a short-term problem like closing a firehouse or laying off police officers, this budget proposes a modest property tax increase that will cost the typical homeowner around $2.57 a week, about $11.15 a month, or $133.79 a year. This will ensure that essential services, including our police and fire departments, are unaffected by this crisis. The associated tax rate declines by over 9% for both homeowners and businesses due to the increases in property values determined by our recently completed reassessment. Overall, the proposed budget increases our property tax levy by $9 million. So let me be clear that part of the increase in the overall charges to homeowners is caused by a state-mandated tax shift from commercial properties to residential ones. Therefore, the typical business or commercial property valued at $370,000 will see a decrease of $243.94. It is our mission to continue to be good stewards of our city's finances and to do all we can to protect our taxpayers and our community. But it's clear now more than ever that our federal and state government partners act to provide direct funding to cities like Rochester. Rochester's challenges are our country's challenges. I will continue to fight with my fellow mayors across our country for this much needed relief. It's up to the federal government now to figure out how to get support to cities for loss of revenue. It's obvious that failing to provide direct financial relief to cities to address the loss of revenue will lead to future disastrous cuts to cities across our nation, and that includes Rochester. I must say that I am grateful to Senator Schumer in particular for leading this fight in Washington to protect cities and all those fighting alongside him, including Senator Gillibrand and our congresspeople, our congressional representatives in the House. He understands that government closest to the people must be protected, and the essential services it provides to our residents must be preserved. This proposed budget does its part to ensure just that. We can and we will preserve, we will persevere, we will recover, and we will do this together. There is so much more work to be done, and we will do it as one community, as the city of Rochester, fearless, resilient, and innovative, just as we have always been and we will always be. I look forward to working with City Council throughout the review process with the full confidence that together we will adopt a budget that delivers more jobs, safer, more vibrant neighborhoods, and greater educational opportunities to our residents. Now, I would like to thank our budget director, Chris Wagner, and his entire team for their tireless work on this year's budget. Up until late yesterday afternoon, he was in and his team was in working on this budget. And we recognize that there may be changes yet to come. But I know that we have the strongest team under the leadership of Chris Wagner that's going to deliver the details and the additional information that we need to make the proper decisions on behalf of our residents, the residents of the city of Rochester, who we all hold dear and love so very, very much. Chris, I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank you and the Deputy Mayor for your leadership and the senior management team for all their work on this. I also want to thank my staff in the budget office for their dedication to getting this done under very challenging circumstances, beginning with Deputy Budget Director Suzanne Warren, Sarah Boyce, Matt Cahill, Joe Mistico, Sarah Ruckberg, and Josephus Tisdale. The proposed 2021 budget totals $529,659,100, which is 4.7% lower than the 1920 amended budget of $555,708,100. The all funds gap we started with in this process, and you can change the slide, please, was about $40.5 million. It grew to $64.4 million as a result of the pandemic and the decisions around that. We closed this gap through a combination of expense and revenue reductions, as this pie chart demonstrates. Reductions to cash capital and enterprise fund balances of about $27.5 million. Net departmental reductions and efficiencies of about $7.3 million. Savings in healthcare contributions through agreement with our unions of $5 million. Reductions to contingency, including savings in furlough and work share of $4.1 million. On the revenue side, Mayor referenced the additional use of fund balance of $7.7 million. Increased revenue from utilities gross receipts tax of $1.7 million. Additional use of premium and interest to pay debt service of $1 million. Additional federal revenue, including community development block grant funding of about $800,000. And increased property tax and pilot revenues of $9.3 million. Go to the next slide. As I said, we used fund balance in the general fund to close the gap. Our total general fund balance used is about $14.8 million. This may put us below our required fund balance set by policy because of the expected revenue impacts in the current year associated with the pandemic. Next slide. The personnel impacts in this budget are primarily those that have already been announced. 194 employees furloughed, 186 work share participants, and 17 potential layoffs. This represents about 11% of our employees. And again, these impacts affect both the current fiscal year and carry over into the 2021 budget. The budget includes a $9 million increase to the tax levy, which remains within the state's tax cap. There are no proposed increases to service charges in local works, water, or refuse. Next slide. The net effect of the tax increase and the tax shift results in an increase to the typical homeowner of $133.79 and a reduction to the typical business of $243.94. Next slide. City Council will conduct hearings on the budget on June 3rd, June 9th, and June 10th, and we'll vote on it on June 16th. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mayor Warren.
All the great work that you have done on this budget. So I want to thank the senior management team for working with us during this challenging time as we have gone through many different iterations of the budget with last minute changes coming back and forth. And so I definitely want to recognize the senior management team, including our deputy mayor, James Smith. And now I will take any questions. Both Chris and I are available for questions that the media may have.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Our first question will come from Patty Singer at the Minority Reporter. Patty.
Hi, thank you. So COVID is not over and we have no idea when that will be over. What is built into this budget to get us through the rest of COVID? What kind of wiggle room is there when expenses will continue to go up for this and revenue, sales tax particular, may continue to decline for the rest of the year? Where's the wiggle room?
So I'll let Chris get into the details, but I'll talk on the overview of this. And that's the fact that this budget assumes a 20% reduction from the state. It also assumes a 15% reduction in sales tax year over year. The fact that our budget year is from July 1 to June 30th allows us to build into this particular budget those changes. We also utilize some of our fund balance, our rainy day fund, to maintain essential services during this time. And so unless we receive word that our state aim aid will decrease further than that, or that our sales tax will be even lower, then we believe that we've built in what we need into this budget. And that's what we're going to submit to City Council. But I also think that that's why it's very, very important that we recognize and advocate for, and that our citizens advocate on a federal level for relief as it pertains to the revenue and a loss of revenue that cities are being provided. When you think about, we're talking about the people on the ground, our police officers, our firefighters, our DES workers, our 911 workers, our DRIVE employees. And so across the board, we're talking about real people, real lives. And that's why we're fighting so hard to get these dollars. And Chris, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, but turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mayor. Sure. So, Patty, we tend, when we budget, right, to take a pretty conservative approach to budgeting. So, we hope that we're putting out the kind of the worst case scenario out there. But there's a lot of unknowns with it, as you said, right? And so when it comes to what our predictions are for revenue streams like sales tax and state aid, we predicted a 25% hit to the fourth quarter sales tax in the current fiscal year. For the comptroller's report that came out just the other day, April sales were down 24% in Monroe County, so it appears that estimate is in the ballpark. We hope to find out more, later today or tomorrow about what the state's going to do. So again, we hope we put forward the worst case scenario. That being said, we're managing the crisis, and monitoring things on a daily basis, and so the management actions that we took in the current year regarding layoffs, furloughs, work share, again, to help reduce expense, we locked down the discretionary spending, as the mayor said. Similar actions, depending upon how things shake out, we've got some management capability to take actions next year as well, and we're just going to continue to monitor things. But there's clearly less flexibility in next budget than there is in the current budget.
So I guess as a quick follow-up to that would be, what's the priority list for what may have to cut if you don't get the aid you want, and still be able to preserve the quality of life in the city and make the city attractive to residents as well as investment and business?
Well, that's what this budget actually does. It preserves all of the essential services that we, as a community, are used to and that our residents are used to. So in this current budget that is being proposed to City Council today, and that they will go through their deliberations and review, we are preserving we believe that our those essential services and that we heard directly from our residents that they wanted protected, and that was police, that was fire, that was 911, and that was the DES services that were being provided.
Great. Our next question will come from Dan Schrank at Channel 10, or excuse me, Channel 13. My apologies.
That's all right. This question is for Mayor Warren. Mayor, I'm wondering, what do you say right now to residents in the city, homeowners in the city who may recently have lost their job, been furloughed from work, whatever their story may be, who are now seeing their property taxes go up, and they're struggling as it is?
Some of this is due to a state mandated tax shift that shifts the burden from businesses to property tax owners. But I will also say that our hope is that they will join with us in the fight to get additional revenue from the federal government. We need to make sure that we're making phone calls, that we're letting our federal legislators know that we need their support. The revenue hits, as I started the conversation off and the discussion off about, we were looking to close a $40 million budget gap. And in 8 weeks, we now have a $65 million budget gap that we're trying to close. And so therefore, we all have to be able to put in a little bit to continue to provide the essential services that our residents told us that was very important to them. And that's police, that's fire, that's 911, and our DES services. And that's exactly what this budget intends and continues to do. And we need all the help that we can get. There were a lot of things that we did because it could have been worse than what it is, to actually preserve those things. And that is by shutting down discretionary spending, by also no non-essential hires. We were in doing what we did last week as it pertained to furloughing and work share. We were able to save about $16 million just by doing those things alone. We're also utilizing our rainy day fund and trying to make sure that we manage that the way that we need to at this time to keep all the essential services going that our residents are used to. We did not want to do a long-term solution like closing a firehouse or a fire company or laying off police officers or firefighters for a short-term problem, which we believe that the COVID-19 is. And Chris, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Mayor, I think you said it all.
If I could just follow up with something slightly off topic. Today we began phase 1 of reopening here in the Finger Lakes. Early on in the process, Mayor, you announced that the playgrounds, soccer fields, basketball courts, all of those would be closed. I'm wondering if in the foreseeable future, that's something you see yourself reversing or reopening those facilities to the public.
Right now, we're under the guidance of course, the health director as well as the governor's office. And as one of the people that's been working with Bob Duffy, who has been charged with leading the reopening here, we have not gotten the details about what outdoor activities besides tennis is being allowed in phase 1. And so that's the one thing that we have a team out there doing now is putting up the tennis nets that we had taken down before. And as we get additional information on what other outdoor activities like basketball or other courts are able to be open, we will do that at this time. But the only direct directive that we have received from the governor's office, and I'm sure that he will be providing additional detail, is that tennis is allowed. The other activities at this point is still not being allowed as far as I know today.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will come from Channel 10. All right, seeing that there's none there, we'll go to Jack Watson at Channel 8. Jack?
Hi, Mayor Warren. Just want to ask about sales tax here, because as you said, it's a major source of the city's revenue, down about 15%, $24 million. What can the city do in order to encourage more local spending that would have sales tax attached to that?
Well, we recognize that our residents are struggling, and I'm not going to tell them to go out and buy a new car. It's just unknown at this point in time. We do know that sales tax is not as bad as, it's bad, but, some of the things like online sales tax and other things that we're receiving is keeping the numbers within where we predicted at the beginning of this health crisis. What I would say that I need and I'm asking our residents to do is to call those federal representatives and ask them to provide relief to the cities, direct relief to cities, so that we can go back to the drawing board and make some of those changes that we would want to make if we were able to get additional revenue. I know, as I said earlier, that Senator Schumer and Gillibrand and the Democratic congressional representatives have been really advocating for relief for cities. We need to make it happen, because without that, then the people that bear the biggest change on not receiving the relief to the city are the people that are on the ground and providing the essential services and continuing our community going during this crisis.
And as a follow-up to that, we heard from County Executive Bello a couple weeks ago about how much federal assistance is going to impact your ability to make the budget whole. Uh, if you could put a number on it, how much federal assistance do you think the city would need?
I'll have to turn that over to the budget director because I don't want to give you an accurate number. Chris?
So, I would say when you look at, what we're forecasting on the revenue loss, I would put it in the 65 to $70 million range between this year and next.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to Brian Sharp at the DNC. Brian?
Thank you. I was just wondering, I think this will probably be for, well, either Mayor or Chris. I'm just wondering, currently, where do things stand with the current year budget? Is the adjustments you've made going to be enough to close out a balanced budget, or where are you tracking?
So I'm going to turn that over to the budget director, but the adjustments that we made was to, when we saw this health crisis coming down, we did a lot of things in the current year budget to not only preserve, but also to go into next year budget in a better position than we knew that we were going to be in at the end of this crisis. And so, Chris, if you want to talk specifically about those details, you may.
Sure. So, yeah, despite the revenue, or rather, despite the expense, curbs we put in place, we are expecting to run a deficit in the current year, and it'll really largely depend upon what the state does and how much the state reduction is. Again, what our predictions were around sales tax for Q4 end up, resulting in about a $9 to $10 million loss from what we were projecting. But the state impact could be, about $17.5 million, right? So despite the spending reductions we put in place, we couldn't overcome that potential. So we expect to run an operating deficit in the current year. The good news there is, again, we've got some fund balance that we can rely on as part of resolving that. But that's where we stand.
Thanks. And on the fund balance, where would the city be left with what is currently budgeted? And I guess if I could sort of double this, going back to Patty's question, is there then kind of a list developed for going forward, or is the fund balance going to still be, is the well deep enough that we can still cover further losses?
So I'll speak to the fund balance, and I'll let the mayor talk to the list. So the fund balance, if things play out, as we project, and again, we're trying to project the worst case scenario, probably be left somewhere in the low 40 to the mid $40 million range, which again is below our prescribed threshold, but again gives us some flexibility if this continues to play out longer than we expect it to.
And I'll add that even though it's below the prescribed threshold, it is well above what we are mandated by law to have. And so the sound fiscal management of the city over decades and years have allowed us to have a healthy fund balance to be able to draw on from this crisis. And we are utilizing this rainy day fund to balance out this current year's budget and a part of it for next year's budget, because we know that the fund balance is something that is available, and we did not want our taxpayers to take the significant hit to have to provide all of the funding to balance the budget.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will come from Philip at Spectrum News. Philip.
So when it comes to investments that you guys are making this year, how will this prepare you guys for moving forward, as we don't know the foreseen consequences of COVID-19?
And so, Philip, I think that what's the most important part to take out of all this is that we are continuing to provide essential services. So every police officer or firefighter that's currently working for the department will continue to do so. We're not cutting our uniformed personnel. When we look at what we decided to do in this budget, it was to preserve what we have and to not make a long-term decision for what we anticipate will be a short-term problem. And so closing a firehouse, laying off police officers or firefighters or others was not something that we wanted to consider. And in talking to our residents and on the call, the telephone town hall, as well as what they let us know via the survey on the internet, this was what they wanted us to maintain, and we'll be able to do that given the budget that we're proposing to City Council today.
Philip, do you have a follow-up?
Not really. I guess I was just talking about you addressed like Rock the Runway and the Latin market, and I was just I guess I wanted you to talk more about those projects.
Okay, so we presented our capital investment budget program to City Council probably about 2 weeks ago. In that, we are talking about capital investments that we will continue to make, and we continue to allocate resources to finish up projects that we currently have underway. So if you go over to Clinton Avenue right now, you'll see people out there working on La Marqueta, as well as we have gone through the design and other processes that we needed to for the Charles Carroll Park, which is along the Riverway. Currently, the Rock City Skate Park is underway as well. And so we have a number of different capital improvement projects that were on the books that we were looking to do, and we're going to continue to do those things and finish those out. And I think that that's very important, because we cannot stop investing in our city and investing in those essential things that our residents hold near and dear to them. Returning our officers to the neighborhood and community has been a priority of this administration as well as of the chief. And so we demolished homes along the East Main Street corridor. And so it's time that we have finished the design. It's going to be time to now to start building the police substation as well as the neighborhood service center that will go there. So when we look at the holistic approach about what capital investments we need to continue to make, we decided that we were going to continue to do those things that our residents told us was near and dear to their heart. And the Rock the Riverway program is a program that is funded, primarily was started by Governor Cuomo, gave us the dollars to start that program, and we want to finish those phase 1 projects that we have underway already. The Rundle Library Terrace, the Charles Carroll Park, the skate park, and some work that we need to do on the other side by the High Falls.
Great, thank you. Oh, thanks. Our next question will come from James Brown at XXI. James?
Okay. Are those state funds for those projects set in stone? Do you already have the money? Could they recall that money as they go further into crisis?
Those dollars have already been allocated, and it's a reimbursable fund. So because they've already allocated it, then the likelihood of them calling it back, especially when we've already entered into contracts and everything with them, is very slim. So we don't anticipate that those state funds will be recalled.
Also, is it realistic to expect the federal government to contribute to local governments? It seems like the law that was put forth, the bill, to do that was dead on arrival, was the term that was used. Are you expecting it? Do you have any indications that it will happen?
So our current budget does not reflect any additional aid or revenue from the federal government. We hope and we're praying for that type of relief, but the budget that we're putting forth today does not reflect any relief from the federal government beyond what we currently receive or know that we are going to receive as far as ESG or CDBG dollars.
Thank you.
Our last questions will come from Jeremy Mule at the City Newspaper. Jeremy?
Hi, Mayor. You've talked a lot about how you stress preserving essential services, the police, the fire, the refuse, things like that. You also mentioned how you froze the discretionary funds. What sort of things aren't people going to see in this budget? You know, what sort of things got held back or cut?
I think a lot of what we cut was capital in investments. So we wanted to be able to start actually building the Lake Avenue Police Station. We are doing that. We are going to phase that in this time. And so we cut back on actually going in the ground and building, but we will be doing the environmental cleanup that we need to do there. And so people will be able to, those types of projects that might have been accelerated in this year's budget, we delayed. And those are the types of investments that they will see. But for our residents, they should not see a difference in the quality of service that they receive from the city of Rochester as it pertains to picking up their trash, picking up their recyclables, from officers being called to our fire department or 911, or even our library services. Currently libraries are closed, but our central library will be doing on-call or on-demand service starting on Monday, and they will start to see some of those services start to come back. So right now, because we are still in a situation where the COVID virus is very real, City Hall has been closed. But over the next couple of weeks, they'll start to see that certain aspects of our services will start to come back. But to the residents of our city, they should not see a change. We basically delayed some of the projects that we had on the books that we're going to start. And Chris, I don't know if you want to add more to that, but preserving our workforce and being able to preserve essential services was a goal that we wanted to achieve in this budget. And I believe that we did that, and hope that City Council does as well as they review the budget.
Yeah, Mayor, just to follow up with you. So some of the things that we did were, we talked about the savings from the city's required healthcare contributions. That was $5 million, right? So that's a recurring saving. So that is a long-term impact on our budget that's positive. We also, any wages that were not contractually obligated to increase, we held flat. No cost of living increases for anything that wasn't contractually obligated. And so in terms of discretionary spending, kinds of things we locked down in the current year were, travel and training, some professional services contracts that had not been executed yet. Those kinds of things. We've got a hiring freeze in place. And so those things, again, are some of the levers that we can continue to pull next year should the crisis extend, beyond what it is that we're thinking it will.
Jeremy, do you have a follow-up?
I do. You know, I'm a city resident. I took the budget survey that you put up and kind of saw some of what you're trying to get feedback on. And, you know, I know this is a complicated question, but what about the special events that the city usually does? I mean, are any of those budgeted?
So at this point in time, many of our special events have been canceled by the promoters. The city contributes, and we also contract with a lot of the different promoters in the community. Right now, we do know that, of course, the Lilac, we were supposed to be in the Lilac Festival, that's canceled. The Jazz Festival is canceled. The Puerto Rican Festival has canceled, but there are events that are well into August that in September that have not been canceled yet. And so we're going to take it one day at a time and lead that those decisions up to the promoters as well as the health directors. We do not see in the near future that we will be able to gather in large groups, given the fact that the virus is still very alive and well. Many of our neighborhood festivals have decided to cancel as well. So unfortunately, we are dealing with this health crisis, and I cannot predict what events will happen or won't happen, but we will take it one day at a time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor, thank you. That's it for questions. Is there anything you'd like to add before we end the conference?
So I just want the residents of the city of Rochester to know and to understand that we are very, very much aware of the challenges that each and every one of you face. And this budget took into account the things that you told us that you wanted to keep, and that is the essential services. We wanted to preserve that. We wanted to not make a long-term decision for a short-term problem that we believe that we're in. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but what I do know is that our city is resilient. I know that our residents are in this with us and that we fight to live another day by working together. We are working very, very hard with our community partners as well as with our government partners to make sure that every day that this virus impacts our community, that our residents are taken care of. From continuing to provide food and essential services to also making sure that we're out there picking up the refuge, as well as making those investments in the infrastructure that we need to make. I hope and I pray that as we go forward, that we will continue to work together in partnership to make sure that we all come out on the other side of this. I also want to address this situation here. Today starts phase 1 of reopening. That does not mean that we are out of the woods as it pertains to the virus. What that means is that some businesses, under the directive of the governor, have been allowed to open up, meaning that those businesses have low impact on the healthcare system. And they are businesses that the governor believes can open up safely. We want to make sure that people recognize we are still under an executive order to basically stay home if you do not need to go out. Continue to social distance. Continue to wear your mask out in public. Continue to protect your circle. I understand that we are all frustrated with what's going on right now. But if these numbers continue to go up and we start to see that the virus is spreading, then I know that our health officials will have us make a different decision as it pertains to open up. And that's why the governor has us opening up in phases. We're in phase 1 right now. We're going to look at it. We're going to assess. We're going to work together as a community to see if we can indeed go to phase 2. That date is to be determined. And why we say to be determined, because that depends on all of us. That depends on me. That depends on you. We're in this together. And I know that we're going through some difficult times. But this budget that we presented to City Council today takes into account those difficult times and makes sure that we preserve our city for generations to come. Thank you.